Good morning, my friends. Today we are going to read The Secret Garden, chapters 19, 20, and 21. Let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 19, Colin's Visitors. Dr. Craven came to Misselthwaite Manor as always after one of Colin's tantrums. He expected to see a pale, weak, sobbing boy lying in bed. Imagine his surprise when he saw Colin sitting up on the sofa and reading a picture book with Mary. Um, I'm sorry to hear that you were ill, the doctor said nervously. "Oh, I'm much better today," said Colin the Rajah, "and I plan to go outside in a day or two for some fresh air." "I thought you didn't like fresh air," said the doctor, taking Colin's pulse. "I don't, when I'm alone," Colin replied royally. "But my cousin is going with me, and a very strong boy I know will push my wheelchair." Colin slept soundly that night and woke up smiling, stretching his arms and legs. His mind was full of plans and thoughts about the garden and Dickon and his wild creatures. It was nice to have good things to think about. "Dickon says that spring has come!" Mary cried joyfully, bounding into his room. Colin had stayed indoors for so many years that he didn't really know about the seasons changing. "Open the window," he said happily. "Maybe we can hear golden trumpets announcing that spring has come." He had read about such fanfare in storybooks. Mary opened the window. "Lie on your back and breathe in the air. That's what Dickon does when he's on the moor. He says it makes him feel strong, like he could live forever and ever." Colin took in big, deep, sweet breaths. After a while, the nurse arrived with breakfast for the children. She was setting their places when Colin made an announcement. In his best Rajah voice, he said, "A boy, a fox, a crow, and two squirrels are coming to see me this morning. I want the servants to bring them here. The boy is Martha's brother Dickon. He's an animal charmer." Soon after, Colin heard a caw, caw in the hallway. "It's Soot," Mary said. Martha opened the door and said, "If you please, sir, here's Mr. Dickon and his creatures." Dickon came in grinning widely. A crow sat on his right shoulder and a squirrel on his left. Another squirrel peeked out of his pocket. Captain trotted beside him, and in his arms Dickon carried a baby lamb. Colin stared in speechless wonder. He'd never spoken to another boy before, let alone a menagerie. But Dickon wasn't at all shy. He knew that creatures stare until they find out about you. So Dickon didn't say anything at first. He went over to Colin and lay the baby lamb in his arms. The lamb nuzzled against Colin's side. "What is it doing?" Colin asked. "It's hungry, and it wants its mother," Dickon explained. He knelt down beside Colin and took a feeding bottle from his pocket. The woolly baby began sucking on it happily. By the time the lamb fell asleep, Dickon had told Colin all about finding the little creature on the moor. As Colin and Mary listened, Soot flew in and out of the open window. The squirrels scampered onto the sill and explored a big tree outside. Captain curled up comfortably at Colin's feet. Dickon and Mary told Colin more about the garden and all that was growing there. Colin's eyes grew huge with excitement. He exclaimed, "I'm really going to see it." "You will," Mary said, "and there's no time to lose." Chapter 20, Going Outside. One day the children gathered in Colin's room to plan how Colin could go to the secret garden without anyone else finding it. When they had decided on a plan, Colin summoned Mr. Roach, the head gardener. Mr. Roach was alarmed because he'd heard stories about the boy's terrible temper and princely ways. He feared he might be ordered to cut down oak trees or dig up orchards. When he entered, Colin's room was full of animals. Colin sat in an armchair holding court. "I have some important orders for you," Colin said to Mr. Roach. "I'm going outside. If the fresh air agrees with me, I may go out every day. When I'm out, the gardeners are to work in the greenhouses until I say they can go back outside." Mr. Roach was relieved. "Very well, sir," he agreed. The afternoon, the strongest footman at Misselthwaite carried Colin downstairs. The nurse helped Colin into his wheelchair, surrounded by cushions with a blanket over his legs. Then Colin waved all the grown-ups away. Dickon pushed the chair outdoors slowly, and Mary walked beside it. At last they came to the long path by the ivy-covered walls. "This is where the robin flew over the wall," Mary said in a soft tone. She pointed at a spot under a lilac tree and said, "And that's where I found the key." They reached the place where the robin had perched in the ivy. "This is where the wind blew back the ivy," Mary explained. She held back the thick ivy to reveal the garden door. She turned the handle, and Dickon pushed Colin forward. Colin covered his eyes until they were inside. The door clicked shut, and Colin dropped his hands and took his first look at the secret garden. All around he saw the tender green vines and branches of the rose plants. Overhead bloomed the white and pink puffs of blossoms and the fruit trees. Dotting the ground were the golden, purple, and white flowers. The air was full of chirping and birdsong. The sun felt warm on his face. Mary and Dickon both stared at Colin. There was a pink glow in his ivory face, neck, and hands. Colin took a deep breath. "I shall get well," he shouted with glee. "Mary, Dickon, I shall live forever and ever." Chapter 21. Someone Else in the Garden. Dickon pushed Colin around the garden. Colin wanted to hear about every tree, flower, and blade of grass. Sometimes he laughed at Dickon's stories, and Mary had to remind him to speak softly. They finally stopped under an apple tree. Colin noticed something new. "That old tree over there," he inquired, "is it quite dead?" "Aye," said Dickon, "but the roses have climbed over it. When the flowers bloom, it'll be the prettiest in the garden." "It looks like a big branch has broken off," Colin remarked. "I wonder how that happened." Mary felt uneasy because she didn't want her cousin to know about his mother's accident. She was relieved when the robin distracted Colin by darting over to its nest with a fat worm in its beak. Colin chuckled softly. "He's taking an afternoon snack to his mate. I could use some tea and biscuits myself." Maybe the garden was magical, Mary thought. Colin seemed like a completely different boy. His face glowed and he laughed. It was as though nothing could make him angry or afraid. "I don't want this afternoon to end," Colin said. "But I'll come back tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that. I'll see spring and summer here. I'll watch everything grow. I'll grow here myself." Dickon said, "We'll have you walking and digging before long." Colin's face flushed. "You think so?" Dickon answered cautiously. "Well, you've got legs, same as other folks." Mary was nervous until Colin said, "There's nothing really wrong with them, except they're very weak and thin. I'm afraid to stand because they shake so much." "Oh, you'll stop being afraid after a while," Dickon smiled. They were all quiet for some time. They wanted to enjoy every last minute of the afternoon, but their silence was broken when Colin said in an alarmed whisper, "Who's that man?" while pointing to the high wall. Mary and Dickon instantly turned around. It was Ben Weatherstaff on a ladder, peering down at them. He shook his fist at Mary. "I should have known it was you. You're a bad one, always poking your nose where it don't belong," Mary called back. "It was the Robin who showed me the way." This made old Ben madder. "Don't you be blaming the Robin," he bellowed. Then his curiosity got the best of him, and he asked, "How did you get in here?" Before Mary could reply, Ben saw something coming across the grass. It was Colin in his wheelchair. Ben's jaw dropped in astonishment. "Do you know who I am?" Colin demanded. Ben was so shocked he could hardly speak. He hadn't seen Colin since he was a baby and had only heard the stories people told. At last Ben said without thinking, I know you. You have your mother's eyes. You're the poor crippled lad." Colin's face turned beet red. He sat up and yelled, "I am not a cripple." "You don't have crooked legs?" Ben asked in a hoarse voice. This was too much for Colin. His anger and pride made him forget everything else. He threw the blanket off his legs and called to Dickon for help. Colin grabbed Dickon's arm, stuck out his thin legs on the grass, and stood up, tall and straight as an arrow. "Look at me!" he shouted. What Ben did next was even more surprising to Mary. The old man choked and gulped, and tears ran down his wrinkled cheeks. Ben gasped out, "You're thin and white as a ghost, but there's not a bump on you. Bless you, boy, you'll be a man yet." Colin stayed standing. In his Rajah voice, he said, "When my father's away, you have to obey me. This is my garden. Get down from that ladder. Miss Mary will show you inside. Now that you've seen us, you'll have to keep our secret." Ben could hardly take his eyes off the boy. Then he touched his hat politely and said, "Yes, sir." Mary ran out of the garden. Colin turned to Dickon, who was beaming. "I told you that you could stand up when you stopped being afraid," he grinned. Colin held his head high. Then he remembered what Mary had said about Dickon. "Are you doing magic?" he asked. "No, you're doing the magic," Dickon replied. "The same magic that makes plants grow and the trees blossom." "I want to walk to that tree," Colin said, "so I will be standing there when he comes in." And he did it. Dickon held his arm, but Colin was wonderfully steady. He was standing beside the tree when Mary and Ben entered. Mary was amazed. Under her breath, she repeated, "You can do it! You can do it!" Colin addressed Ben. "Look at me. Am I a hunchback? Have I got crooked legs?" "Not you, sir," Ben said in almost his usual way. "But why have you been hiding, letting folks think you're crippled and was half-witted?" "Who said that?" Colin demanded angrily. Lots of folks. Lots of folks tell lots of lies," Ben said. "Everyone said I was going to die," Colin said fiercely, "but I am not." Ben looked him up and down. "No, so," he said gently, "you've got too much pluck. I saw that when you planted your feet on the ground. Now sit yourself down a bit, sir." Colin did sit. In a softer tone he asked what work Ben did in the gardens. "Anything I'm told," the old man said. "I'm kept on here because your mother, she liked me." There was a soft look in his eyes. This was her garden. After she was gone, I'd come down here in secret and climb over the wall. But the last 2 years I haven't been able to because of my stiff knees. "So you did the cutting and the pruning?" Dickon exclaimed. Ben continued. "Mrs. Craven was so fond of this place. Once she made me promise that if she was ever ill or away, I'd tend her roses. But when she died, everybody was ordered to stay out, but I kept me promise." "I'm glad you did," Colin said kindly, "and I know you can keep our secret." "Aye, I will," Ben said, "and I'll be glad to come by in the door again." Colin reached for Mary's trowel. His hand was weak, but he stuck the trowel in the ground and turned over some dirt. He looked up at Dickon and said, "You told me I could walk and dig, and here I am, doing it." Ben laughed hoarsely. "You're a Yorkshire lad for sure," he said. "How'd you like to plant something? I can get a rose in a pot." Colin gladly agreed, and Ben hurried away, forgetting about his aches and pains. With Dickon's help, Colin dug until the hole was deep enough. Ben soon returned from the greenhouse. He hobbled as fast as he could and presented the potted rose to Colin. Colin set the plant in the hole and held it while Ben filled in the soil firmly. "I planted it!" Colin proclaimed with satisfaction. "Help me up, Dickon. I want to be standing when the sun sets. That's part of the magic." When the sun went down on this strange and wonderful day, Colin was standing straight up on his own 2 feet and laughing. All right, my friends, thank you so much for joining me today. Come back next time for chapters 22, 23, and 24. Bye bye now.